a subject drawer and physically flip through card after card. When you found a promising one, you weren't done. It had a cryptic code called the Dewey Decimal Number. You'd write that number on a slip of paper, then wander the labyrinth of shelves, hunting for the exact spine matching your code. The process took 20 minutes on a good day. And the most devastating part? If the book was checked out, you just didn't get the information. No similar results, no backup links, just nothing. The wildest part is that librarians had this entire analog database memorized. They knew exactly which drawer, section, and shelf held the answers. Walking, breathing human search engines. Number 9. The anti-jogging music player. The Discman was a revolutionary music player that let you listen to songs anywhere, as long as you didn't move a muscle. It worked by bouncing a microscopic laser off a spinning disc, which sounds futuristic until you bump it. The laser instantly loses its place, and your music turns into a robot having a seizure, an aggressive bah right in the middle of your favorite song. Because of this, 90s kids developed a highly calculated walking style. Slow, steady, arms out for shock absorption, like carrying a bowl of hot soup across a tightrope. You couldn't jog, you couldn't ride a bike, you couldn't walk downstairs without holding your breath. Eventually, companies introduced anti-skip protection. It helped a little bit, the way a screen door helps keep out a hurricane. Plus, you could only listen to one album at a time. If you wanted options, you carried a massive wallet stuffed with CDs. Kids today have 100 million songs in their pocket and complain about buffering. We treated a plastic disc like a sleeping newborn baby. Number 8. Passing notes. You wrote a message on loose leaf paper, folded it into the smallest geometric square possible, and passed it across an entire classroom while a teacher was standing right there. No smartphones, no disappearing texts, just a tiny piece of paper traveling through enemy territory. The stakes were genuinely insane. If the teacher caught that note, she wouldn't just confiscate it. She would read it aloud, resulting in classroom-wide humiliation. You learned to fold paper into complex shapes that could survive 6 sweaty hands. The basic rectangle, the tight triangle. These kids were structural engineers. The passing system had strict rules. Wait for the teacher to turn. Slide the note to the edge of your desk. The next person grabs it without looking. A relay race where the baton was your social life. If someone fumbled, everyone froze. The pressure was enormous for a paper that usually just said, "Do you like him? Circle yes or no." Occasionally, the teacher intercepted it and announced, "I think the class would like to hear this." You just had to sit there, listening to your own words while 30 people stared at your red face. Then you went home and wrote another note the next day, because what else were you going to do? Number 7. The human antenna. Before Wi-Fi, getting a clear TV picture was a full-time job. Every television had 2 long metal antennas sticking out the top, rabbit ears, and they were useless unless treated with absolute precision. You'd spend 20 minutes bent over the TV like a surgeon, tilting one antenna left, the other at a 47-degree angle. The second you let go, the picture turned into a snowstorm, so you'd just stand there, frozen, hand firmly touching the metal, because your body became the signal conductor. You'd stand with one arm stretched out, one leg raised, looking like a confused flamingo, because somehow that was the only position that got a clear picture of Wheel of Fortune. People wrapped the antenna tips in aluminum foil. Nobody knew why it worked, but you just did it. Some families had a designated antenna kid. Your job, stand here, hold this metal rod, and do not breathe. And the static wasn't just a bad picture. It was a deafening wall of white noise blasting while you desperately searched for the sweet spot. There was a specific panic of a good show starting, the picture going fuzzy, and having 30 seconds to fix it before missing the opening scene. That was cardio. That was survival. Number 6. The phone book. Every year, a massive heavy book appeared on your doorstep. The phone book. It had the first name, last name, home address, and personal phone number of nearly everyone in town. Your full identity, printed in a physical book, and handed to every single person in your city for free. Today, if someone posted your exact home address online, you'd call the police. Back then, the phone company did it annually, and people just used it as a booster seat for toddlers. The New York City phone book was so thick, people claimed it could stop a bullet. If you had a common last name like Smith, you'd scroll your finger down 3 solid pages of Smiths, hoping you picked the right person. But the absolute craziest part? You couldn't just opt out. Your personal information was public by default. The only way to get your name out of that book was to pay the phone company extra for an unlisted number. You literally had to pay a monthly subscription fee for basic privacy, and nobody thought that was weird. Number 5. Navigating by printing the internet. Before GPS, getting somewhere new was a military operation. preparation. You'd sit at the family desktop the night before a road trip, go to mapquest.com, type your destination, and wait. The printer would screech to life, spitting out 14 pages of highly detailed directions. 14 pages for a trip 3 towns over. Page 1, turn left out of your driveway. Page 14, you have arrived. Everything in between was a fantasy novel. If you missed a single turn, game over. No soothing voice saying, recalculating. No little blue dot showing where you were. You were just lost. You'd pull over at a gas station and ask for directions from a stranger, who would point and say, turn left at the old Miller farm, a farm that burned down in 1987. If you forgot to print the directions, you had to have your mom read them out loud while your dad white-knuckled the steering wheel. It says turn right on Elm, or was it Oak? Kids today yell at Siri for a 1-minute delay. We were navigating the country like 18th century pirates with stacks of paper. Number 4, the high-stakes art of burning a CD. Making a mixtape for your crush was a part-time job. You'd sit at your desktop, open Windows Media Player, and spend hours carefully picking exactly 12 songs. The first song set the tone, the last was your closing argument. You were a high-level music producer, unpaid and terrified of rejection. Then came the burning process. You'd hit burn and stare at the progress bar. 4%, 5%. If your little brother bumped the desk at 94%, that CD was permanently ruined. Every failed burn was a small financial tragedy. If you were serious, you'd design the cover art with markers and write their name on the disc in your best Sharpie handwriting, practiced first on scrap paper. Then you'd hand it to them at school like presenting a Grammy. Today, a kid types, made this for you, and pastes a Spotify link. A burned CD meant someone spent an entire Sunday afternoon thinking about you. A Spotify link means someone spent 4 seconds thinking about you, roughly how long it takes to sneeze. Number 3, the cereal box treasure hunt. You used to pick cereal based entirely on what was hidden inside the box. The second you got home, the cereal itself became irrelevant. You would flip that box upside down, or just reach your entire arm deep into a box of Lucky Charms like a surgeon, fishing through thousands of marshmallows with your bare hand. When your fingers finally brushed against plastic at the bottom, it was like striking gold. Sometimes the treasure was incredible, a working periscope, a pullback race car, but sometimes you ripped open the plastic and it was just a sticker. You stood there, covered in cereal dust, holding a flimsy sticker of the Trix rabbit, and had to accept your fate. The box just screamed toy inside and let your imagination run wild. Captain Crunch once included a toy whistle that could reportedly hack early telephone systems. Kellogg's put actual cassette tapes in their boxes. Imagine explaining that to a kid today. You got a music tape from your breakfast? Yes, and it was the greatest morning of my life. Kids today get a QR code that takes them to a website full of ads. Nobody is reaching their arm into anything. Number 2, disposable cameras. You had exactly 27 pictures. That was it. 27 single shots to capture your entire summer vacation. No retakes, no filters, no screen on the back to check if you looked good. You just pointed the plastic box, clicked, and hoped for the best. And the worst part? You wouldn't find out how they turned out for 2 weeks. You'd drop the camera off at a drugstore and just wait, in agonizing suspense. When you finally got that paper envelope back, at least 5 photos were a massive close-up of your finger. 3 more were pitch black because someone forgot the flash. 1 was a perfectly framed shot of the ceiling. And there was always that one mystery photo from the beginning of the roll. A blurry dog, or your uncle making an unhinged face. Kids today take 47 identical selfies just to pick the perfect one. Back then, you had 27 shots for an entire vacation and made it work. And those blurry, dark, finger-covered photos somehow meant more than any perfect iPhone portrait ever will. Number 1, the streetlight curfew. There was no text message checking in, no phone call, no GPS tracking your location. Your parents just opened the front door, pointed outside, and said, "Be back when the streetlights come on." That was the entire set of instructions. The neighborhood streetlight was a giant glowing alarm clock on a pole, except instead of a snooze button, the consequence was getting grounded for a week. And it worked. Kids would be deep in the woods, 3 neighborhoods over, covered in mud. The second that light flickered on, everyone just knew. You'd see that faint orange glow, and suddenly every kid scattered like they heard a starting pistol. The sprint home was legendary. Full speed, cutting through backyards, jumping fences, dodging sprinklers. Because being late wasn't just embarrassing. Your mom would be standing at the front door, arms crossed, with a look that meant dinner was cold, and your weekend plans were about to disappear. The craziest part? Your parents had no idea where you were all day. They just had pure, blind trust that you'd figure it out, survive, and come home alive. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.
Yeah. Grab this.
Let's get right into it. Number 10, the wrong resistor. So there's this engineer named Wilson Greatbatch. It's 1956. He's trying to build a device that records heart sounds. He reaches into a box of electronic components and grabs a resistor, except he grabs the wrong one. He puts it into his circuit anyway, and instead of recording anything, the device starts pulsing, a tiny, rhythmic electrical pulse, over and over. Greatbatch stares at it. Those pulses sound exactly like a heartbeat. By accident, his broken little device was pulsing at almost exactly the rate of a human heart. He spent the next 2 years shrinking the whole thing down small enough to put inside a human body. Before this, pacemakers were the size of a television set. Patients were basically chained to a machine just to keep their hearts beating. The first person to receive Greatbatch's implantable pacemaker was a 77-year-old man in 1960. He lived for another 18 months. Today, around 3 million people worldwide are walking around with a pacemaker keeping them alive, all because of one engineer's simple mistake. Greatbatch later called it the single most important mistake of his life. Number 9, the royal potato. It's the 1700s and France is starving. Crops keep failing. There's this plant sitting right there that could fix everything, the potato, but nobody wants to eat it. The French thought potatoes caused leprosy and fever. Farmers refused to grow them. Poor people refused to eat them, even when they were literally starving. Enter Antoine Augustin Parmentier. He'd been a prisoner of war in Prussia and survived on a diet of potatoes. He knew they were the answer, so he came up with a plan. He convinced King Louis XVI to declare potatoes a royal vegetable, reserved only for the nobility. Common people were forbidden from eating them. Parmentier planted a field of potatoes outside Paris and put armed royal guards around it all day. People walking by would see the guards and think, what on earth is so valuable in there? But then Parmentier told the guards to go home at night, on purpose. Predictably, people started sneaking in and stealing the potatoes, because if the king wants it, it must be amazing. If there are guards protecting it, it must be worth stealing. Within months, people all over France were secretly growing potatoes in their gardens. Parmentier also threw fancy dinner parties where every dish was made from potatoes. Marie Antoinette wore potato flowers in her hair. The king wore one on his jacket. The famine eased. France started growing potatoes everywhere, all because one guy figured out that the fastest way to make people want something is to tell them they can't have it. Number 8, the Boston Molasses Flood. It's January 1919 in Boston. A giant metal tank sits in the North End neighborhood, holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses. The tank was built by Purity Distilling, and the guy who oversaw construction had zero engineering experience. It leaked from day one. The company's response was to paint the tank brown, so it would be harder to see the leaks. On January 15th, the temperature jumped 40 degrees. The molasses warmed up, expanded, and the tank gave up. A wave of molasses 25 feet high came rushing through the streets at 35 miles per hour. It crushed buildings, knocked a train off its track, and killed 21 people. The victims sued. The company blamed anarchists, claiming a bomb had been planted. But after a 6-year case, the truth came out. The tank had never been tested. No licensed engineer had signed off on the design. The walls were too thin. The company lost. The fallout directly pushed Massachusetts to pass laws requiring licensed engineers to review and sign off on all major construction projects. Before this, basically anyone could design a building, a tank, or a bridge. That concept spread across the country and became the foundation of modern engineering standards, all because someone decided to build a molasses tank with the structural integrity of a paper cup. Number 7, a cure from a chemical weapon. It's World War I. Soldiers are dying in the trenches from a yellow cloud drifting toward them. Mustard gas. It burned their eyes, lungs, and skin. But military doctors treating the soldiers noticed something strange. The gas was destroying their white blood cells. That's obviously terrible if you're a healthy person. But a doctor named Alfred Gilman looked at this and had an idea. What if you used it against cancers that involve too many white blood cells like lymphoma? His idea was to poison the cancer to death with actual poison, war poison. He and his colleague Louis Goodman quietly started testing it on mice with tumors. The tumors shrank. Then they found a human patient, a man with advanced lymphoma, whose tumors shrank dramatically. He got better. Not forever, but for a while, he got genuinely better. This research was classified as a military secret during World War II. They were secretly injecting people with modified chemical weapons and watching what happened. It was the birth of chemotherapy. The first chemotherapy drug was literally called nitrogen mustard. Drugs that descended directly from that mustard gas research are still used to treat cancer today. Millions of people are alive because a doctor looked at a weapon designed to kill people and decided to aim it at the cancer instead. Number 6, the sunken treasure of Scapa Flow. Scientists building super-sensitive radiation detectors need the metal parts to be completely clean. No background radiation at all. The problem is, every piece of steel made after 1945 is contaminated. Not dangerously so, but enough to ruin a sensitive instrument. That's because 1945 is when we started detonating nuclear bombs, releasing radioactive particles into the atmosphere that got baked into all new steel. So scientists needed low background steel that was made before the nuclear age, and there was almost none of it left on Earth. Almost. In 1919, after Germany lost World War I, the German Navy was ordered to surrender its entire fleet to the British. The fleet was parked in a Scottish harbor called Scapa Flow. The German admiral, Ludwig von Reuter, gave a final order: sink every single ship. He scuttled 74 warships rather than hand them over. Von Reuter's little tantrum had accidentally created the world's largest time capsule of clean, pre-nuclear steel. For decades, those ships sat at the bottom of the ocean, perfectly sealed off from the contaminated atmosphere. Divers started cutting pieces off the sunken ships, and that steel became some of the most valuable scientific material on the planet. It's been used in radiation detectors sent to space, in dark matter experiments, and in medical devices that detect cancer. Number 5, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Some Italian guys in the 1100s decided to build a tower. They picked the worst possible ground to build it on: soft, unstable soil that had the structural integrity of wet sand. The tower started leaning almost immediately. By the time it was finished, it was leaning about 5.5 degrees to one side. And then the earthquakes came. 4 major earthquakes have hit the region over the centuries, the kind that flattens solid stone structures. And the Leaning Tower of Pisa was completely fine, not a crack. Here's why. That same soft, mushy soil that caused the lean in the first place absorbs seismic energy like a sponge. When an earthquake sends shockwaves through the ground, rigid soil transfers the energy straight into the building, but the soft soil under the tower soaks up the vibrations before they can do damage. It's like dropping a glass on a mattress versus dropping it on concrete. The tower was sitting on a giant natural shock absorber. The worst engineering decision in Italian history accidentally produced one of the most earthquake-resistant structures in the region. A mistake that made it famous also made it safe. Number 4, the Chernobyl exclusion zone. In 1986, Soviet engineers ran a safety test that went so badly, a nuclear reactor exploded. It released 400 times more radiation than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The entire city of Pripyat was abandoned overnight. The Soviet government drew a 2,600 square kilometer circle around the disaster called the exclusion zone. No humans allowed. They thought they had created a dead zone. They were spectacularly wrong. The moment humans left, nature moved in. Within a few decades, the exclusion zone became one of the most thriving wildlife areas in Europe. Wolves, bears, lynx, and even Przewalski's horses, the rarest wild horse on the planet, all moved in and started thriving. Scientists found wolf populations inside the zone were 7 times higher than in nearby nature reserves. The reason is simple. Radiation is bad for animals, but humans are worse. When scientists compared animals inside the zone versus outside, yes, the ones inside had some radiation exposure, but the ones outside were dealing with hunting, habitat destruction, and farming. Turns out a little radiation is a much better deal than having us as neighbors. The worst nuclear disaster in history accidentally created Europe's best wildlife sanctuary. Not because radiation is good, but because the one thing truly toxic to the ecosystem was us. Number 3, the Doomsday Vault. Way up in the Arctic, on a frozen island called Svalbard, a coal mining company dug tunnels deep into a mountain. They soon realized the coal wasn't worth the trouble and abandoned the mine, just a frozen, empty hole in the middle of nowhere. Meanwhile, the world's food supply depends on just a few hundred crop varieties. If a disease or disaster wiped those out, billions could starve. Scientists decided they needed a backup plan for all of Earth's seeds, a vault that could survive a nuclear war, a pandemic, or a meteor strike. They needed somewhere cold, stable, and remote. Then someone looked at that useless, abandoned coal mine in Svalbard and realized it was perfect. The tunnels were already dug, the mountain was permafrost, so even if the power went out, everything would stay frozen. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault opened in 2008. It now holds over 1.3 million seed samples from almost every country on Earth, a backup of everything needed to restart agriculture from scratch. When the Syrian civil war destroyed a seed bank in Aleppo, scientists withdrew their deposits from Svalbard, grew new seeds, and restocked. The mining company thought they failed. They accidentally built the most important room on Earth. Number 2, the Berlin Airlift. It's 1948. Berlin is split, with the western half controlled by the Allies, sitting like an island deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany. Stalin decided to get rid of this splinter. He blocked every single road, rail, and canal into West Berlin. 2.5 million people were cut off from food, fuel, and medicine. He figured the West had two choices: give up the city or watch it starve. Except there was one thing he couldn't block: the sky. The West had 3 legally guaranteed air corridors into Berlin. On June 26, 1948, the Berlin airlift began. At first, it was chaos, but a general named William Tunner created a genius system. Planes landed every 90 seconds. They were unloaded by ground crews in 30 minutes while the pilot stayed in the cockpit. Then they refueled and immediately took off again. At its peak, a plane was landing in West Berlin every 45 seconds. They flew in thousands of tons of supplies every day. The blockade was supposed to make the West look weak. Instead, it made them look like legends, feeding an entire city from the air. After 11 months, the Soviets quietly lifted the blockade. The airlift that was born from Stalin's terrible decision became the foundation of modern air logistics. Systems developed in Berlin directly influenced how FedEx and other global shipping networks operate today. Number 1. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. In 1911 New York, the owners of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory had a system to stop workers from stealing fabric scraps. Every day they locked the exit doors from the outside, trapping hundreds of young immigrant women on the upper floors of the building. On March 25th, a fire started. It spread instantly through the rooms piled high with fabric. The workers ran to the exits and found them locked. The single fire escape collapsed. The fire department's ladders only reached the 6th floor. 146 workers died. Some jumped from the windows to escape the flames. The public was furious. Within days, 100,000 people marched in protest. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was a locked door. The tragedy launched the Factory Investigating Commission, which uncovered that the Triangle Factory's conditions were the standard, not the exception. The commission's work led to over 30 new laws in New York, covering fire safety, building codes, and working hours. These laws became the blueprint for the rest of the country. The green exit signs glowing over doors, the panic bars that let you push doors open from the inside, mandatory fire sprinklers and fire drills, all of these trace back to this one fire. A young investigator on that commission, Frances Perkins, witnessed the fire firsthand. She would later become U.S. Secretary of Labor and spend her career turning the lessons from that day into federal law. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.
Grabs. On hitting him.
Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. Unluckiest deaths in history.
Want to clear up that is just...
Ever read about the unusually tragic death of some historical figure, or even just the random old lady across the street and think, oh, that sucks? Well, you're in for a few more of those. Starting off this list is Francois Vatel, one heck of a perfectionist. He was the maître d'hôtel, or maître d', for French nobility. In case you didn't know, a maître d' is the master of the house, basically a general in terms of waitstaff at a restaurant or overall event. They make sure that everything is in line from decorations to food and that all guests are always happy. Now, if you've ever worked in any form of customer service, you know how stressful this can be, especially when you can't tell your guests to frig off because they're literal royalty. Unlike customers today who just think they are. Francois was in a career of pure stress, but he was the best at what he did, having been formally recognized by many top chefs across France for his ability to ensure guest satisfaction. I mean, how often do you hear stories about royal servants? Almost never, except for Francois. History often mistakes Francois for being a chef himself, but that was never the case. He just handled everything in the front of house. Anyway, this story begins and ends all the way back in 1671 in Fancy Pants, France. It was at this time that France was experiencing a golden age under supreme French king overlord leader fella Louis XIV, France's and history's longest known reigning monarch to date. This big bushel of baguettes ruled for almost 72 and a half years. Under his rule, French power expanded across the world. Arts and culture were flourishing, and the wealthy were living in utmost extravagance. Sure, there were plenty of wars going on in the background, but that's for the poor people to worry about. With such mindless self-indulgence pouring out of every orifice, parties, galas, celebrations, shindigs, and balls were just the norm. But these royal retreats demanded a professional to ensure that everyone kept a crusty yellow smile on their dusty white faces. That's where Francois came in. Having a strong resume of serving under notable French figures you've probably never heard of, like this guy and that guy, Francois was given the task of organizing a banquet in King Louis's honor for over 3,000 people. That's
Shit.
3,000 of the most rich and powerful people of the age. You don't
Tried
want to disappoint them, do you? You can't. It's not an option. Do you know what they would do to someone who messed up the king's banquet? Well, that option wouldn't be invented for another 100 years, but it's a quick end no matter how you cut it. The feast was to last across 3 days, and Francois was given just 2 weeks to prepare. So with no time to waste, he nervously took to the task. Over the next 15 days, Francois managed to get all of his French ducks in a row. Drapes were draped, silverware sparkled, chandeliers shimmered, and guests were gobsmacked. All 6,000 of them. Yeah, over double the anticipated party size showed up. Luckily, there was still plenty of food to spare. But another kick in the dick for Francois was the fact that it was raining, canceling the planned fireworks for the evening, which bummed out several of the guests. Well, that's just uncontrollable circumstances, you might say, as you pull out your brown tooth. But not to Francois. Remember, he was a perfectionist, and things were not perfect. Besides these 2 minor infractions, the first day went off without a hitch, but the second day would prove to be Francois' last. In the morning, Vittel received devastating news. Only half of his fish order for the breakfast buffet had arrived. He knew that without the precious poisson, people would be palpably peckish. This was the last straw. Francois spiraled into a panic, knowing that he had failed in his duties, and he would forever feel the crushing weight of his shame for the rest of his life. But the rest of his life wouldn't actually be that long, as shortly after receiving the news and breaking down into an inconsolable mess, Francois rushed into his bedchambers to right his wrong the only way he knew how. Standing by his bedside, he brandished his iconic ceremonial stabbing sword and rammed it through his own tummy. He laid in a puddle of his own blood, undiscovered for some time until, yo, Francois, the rest of the fish is Yeah, that's right. The remainder of the order arrived almost immediately after Francois decided to carry out a permanent solution to a temporary problem. His body was then taken from the palace and buried in secret while the rest of the guests partied on. Nearly every aspect of Isadora Duncan's life could be summarized by one word: tragic. Childhood? Tragic. Adult life? Tragic. Family? Tragic. Career? Successful and groundbreaking, but then tragic. All of this capped off by her sudden, unlucky, and tragic death. Born and raised in the sparkling cesspit that is San Francisco, California in the 1800s, things were already not off to a great start. She was the youngest of 4, with a loving mother and supportive and wealthy banker father, until his bank collapsed under mysterious and fraudulent circumstances, subsequently leading to a marital collapse under mysterious and infidelitous circumstances. He then died in a boat crash several years after that. It is said that his last words were somewhere in the ballpark
of... A wild Goomy appears catch it using poke catch. Winners revealed in 90s.
So after Papa's bank went corrupt and her parents defaulted on their marriage, the struggles really stacked up. She lived with her mother and siblings, moving to Oakland, California to begin life anew. She attended school from ages 6 to 10, but dropped out, finding the schooling system restrictive, boring, and lame. Instead, Isadora and her siblings earned their daily bread by teaching the local yokels the art of dance. Thankfully, years of doing the hokey pokey allowed Isadora to turn herself around. After all, that's what it was all about. She joined a formal theater company at the age of 19 to expand her art. Problem was, the extent of dance at the time was very rigid and emotionless. Instead, Isadora yearned for something a little bit more free-flowing and expressive. She wanted less of this, a little bit more of this. But the dance community in America wasn't ready to pick up what she was throwing down, so she had to search for better opportunities abroad. Well, that was definitely a good choice because she soon found herself dancing in the presence of wealth and royalty across London. Oh, it's a beautiful dancer, isn't it? And Paris. I'm le deux fromage. Her revolutionary style took the world of dance by storm. With her newfound success, she wished to provide better opportunities for the youth, opportunities that she wished that she had as a spry sapling. In order to do so, she opened up an informal dance school in Berlin, Germany in 1904, which, along with teaching kids their ABCs and Eins, Zwei, also put interpretive dance on the menu, not as a profession, but as a hobby and method of expression. After about a decade, Isadora left to open up a second school in Paris after a certain Austria started getting hungry for conflict. Unfortunately, the new school didn't last very long as tensions escalated and the Great War broke out in Europe, so she fled back home to the US right when the getting was good. As for her personal life, her travels introduced her to many suitable bachelors across the art world. She found love multiple times, and Cupid shuffled into the sheets, popping out 3 kids. But of course, fate would have other plans for this happy chapter. For instance, one of her children died in infancy. The other 2 cruised along in a car with their caretaker and crashed into the River Seine. They drowned. Understandably, Isadora spiraled into a deep, deep depression in her later years and fell out of the spotlight, her debts piling up as high as her empty liquor bottles. But this life of misfortune was about to be topped off with a disastrous bow. On September 14th, 1927 in Nice, France, Isadora was riding shotgun in a fancy car while wearing an abnormally long fancy scarf. Normally, the combination of heavy machinery and loose articles of clothing warrant a live leak watermark, and poor Isadora was about to learn why. As the vehicle sped off and she bid her farewells, her fashionable fabric forged her fate. Her long scarf that was whipping in the wind became entangled in the rear tire of the car, wrapping around the rear axle and pulling tight. In an instant, the scarf became a noose, and Isadora's neck was snapped before she could even react. At just 50 years old, the spotlight faded on the inspirational dancer. Now trust me, for the life of me, I really want to pronounce this guy's name as Tycho Brahe, but apparently the proper Danish pronunciation is Tycho Brahe. Like, listen to this.
Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe.
Person saying this doesn't even sound confident in their own pronunciation. Anyway, teeny tiny Tycho was the talk of the town back in the 16th century. He was renowned as one of the world's greatest astronomers and one of the last great astronomers before the invention of the telescope. So these guys were just raw dogging the heavens trying to figure it all out. Hey, is that a new star up there? Oh, where? Right over... Oh, nope. I lost it. But that, of course, didn't discourage the Celestials' silly billies from trying to figure out how the known universe worked, or at least what the human eye could see. Born and heir to many of the Kingdom of Denmark's noble families, Tycho was loaded, and thus well-educated. He made several breakthroughs in the field of astronomy and even dabbled in astrology and alchemy. But we know those are more pseudoscience poppycock. Well, unless you're a middle-aged woman who thinks that jerking a crystal with rainwater will make all of your wishes come true or whatever.
A new hand touches the beacon.
Despite his innovations of spotting new stars and measuring the skies with rather impressive accuracy, he still made the oopsie of proposing his own geocentric model, which put the Earth in the center of the universe rather than the Sun. The planets revolved around the Sun, but the Sun revolved around the Earth. He almost had it. Don't worry though, Copernicus took home the blue ribbon with his heliocentric model. The thing about newer branches of science is that there's a lot to discover as you put the fundamental pieces together, which grants you a lot of leverage over outsiders looking in who just don't understand it quite yet. That being the case, many higher nobles and even the king himself applauded Tycho in his efforts, just stuffing his pockets with money to fund any and all research that he desired to advance the field of astronomy. What's that? You've charted over 700 stars? Beautiful. There's things called supernovas? Fantastic. Comets are just burning bits of rock? Amazing. Can you leave? Danish King Frederick II was so tickled by Tycho's work that he granted him an estate on an island to build his own personal, customized observatory so that he could look up at the sky in complete solidarity. And so he did. For about 21 years, Tycho plotted the planets, tracked the transits, and crunched the calculations. Everything seemed great, at least until King Frederick bit the disease dust and his 11-year-old war-obsessed, noble-hating son took over and threatened to seize Tycho's land and assets. Not wanting to deal with this two-body problem, the astronomer said screw it and shifted his orbit over to Prague, where he was invited to build another observatory. This time, however, he took on an apprentice, one Johannes Kepler, who would go on to influence many famed physicists like Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton. Together, the two continued where Tycho left off before getting booted from his Tower of Solitude. But everything came to a halt in 1601 when attending a banquet. According to Kepler, Tycho was in agonizing discomfort. You alright? Nope, gotta piss. Real bad. Dude, just get up and go. Mate. Nope, bad manners. Gotta hold it. Alright, don't complain to me when, you piss yourself. Ooh, lordy. Yo, Tycho. Tico eventually headed home to drain his dragon, but at that point, it would barely even dribble. Over the next several days, the pain got excruciatingly worse. There was no relief in sight. Just 11 days after holding in his pee to avoid bad etiquette at dinner, Tycho Brahe died of a completely avoidable bladder infection. Remember, fellas and fellettes, listen to what your body's telling you. Otherwise, you might just piss it off. For poor Cornelia Zangaribandi, little is really known about her life, as the only remarkable thing about the wrinkly Diovelina was her mysterious, sudden, and fiery fate. That's because Cornelia is one of the unlucky few cases of a phenomenon known as spontaneous human combustion. A cause of death in which the victim suddenly bursts into flames, seemingly unprovoked or without an obvious cause, and is reduced to nothing but a pile of ash. But when you really dig deep into the dirt of these cases, you start to recognize some patterns. For one, the victims are almost always alcoholics to some degree and recently horked down a medically inadvisable amount of booze. That's the spirit, and that's the wine. Next, the victims tend to be elderly females. Not that it necessarily makes much of a difference, but combustible Cornelia here was 66 years young when she attempted to cosplay as a phoenix. Additionally, there was always an external source of ignition, which, in my opinion, completely invalidates the whole spontaneous aspect. So what did the heck happened to our Cornelia? Well, on one fateful night in 1731, the Italian noblewoman had just finished off a non-stereotypical meal. Countess Cornelia was reported by her maid as acting rather, quote, dull and heavy, slomping around to and fro after downing a hefty heap of brandy. The maid helped the inebriated elder to her room, and the two spent several hours chit-chatting and shooting the shit. The Countess was also a creature of habit, habitually applying some of her own personal ointment across her withering frame, an icky-sticky camphorated brandy mix which helped with her pain relief. After some bobbitying and a bit of boopying, the maid left the Countess's room after she boarded the train to Sleepytime Junction. And so, all was well. Until the next morning. Cornelia was noted to be sleeping in a bit later than usual, but that was to be expected after how heavily she drank the night before. The maid eventually entered the Countess's chambers to find something horrifyingly perplexing. According to the eyewitness, this is what she found. 4 feet distance from the bed was a heap of ashes, 2 legs untouched from the foot to the knee with their stockings on. Between them was the lady's head, whose brains, half of the back part of the skull, and the whole chin were burnt to ashes, amongst which were found 3 fingers blackened. All the rest was ashes. A small oil lamp on the floor was covered with ashes, but no oil in it. The Countess was dead. The curious part is that no other pieces of furniture in the room seemed to be affected by the suspected blaze. Instead, everything was draped in a greasy, smelly soot. Now, it may have appeared as a mysterious death to the people of the time, but us modern folk live in an age of true crime podcasts and such, so it's pretty easy to piece together what probably happened. Nevertheless, it's a pretty tragic way to go, but probably a good reminder to never handle open flames after converting your body into a human Molotov cocktail. The Mughal Empire was one of the richest and longest ruling empires in the history of India, but it was almost lost in its infancy. Inheriting the newly founded empire in 1530 from his dad at the age of 22, Emperor Humayun bit off way more than he could chew. He was an inexperienced ruler and lacked a lot of the self-confidence and leadership qualities that you'd expect from an emperor. But he was the eldest son, so it all went to him. Gotta love primogeniture. That, my good fellows and fellettes, is the word of the day.
Nice.
Now, with it being a new empire and all, there was a problem with consolidating power. Lots of the local governors and leaders resisted Mughal control. To help disperse some of that responsibility, Humayun granted some land to his 3 younger half-brothers, all of whom were little shitheads, constantly undermining their older brother to the point of collapsing the empire as a whole. Not far off, another ruler had taken notice of the young emperor's power struggle. This guy was Sher Shah Suri of Bahar, and he saw quite the opportunity in front of him. Not wanting to waste any time, he quickly gathered his army and made a push for Agra, the capital of the Mughal Empire, and 1 sheep's onomatopoeia away from being a Disney IP. Humayun retaliated and the two clashed on the battlefield. After a few skirmishes, the two agreed to a diplomatic end to the fighting. Sher Shah was given control over some territory in exchange for a peaceful retreat. He agreed, but since the deal did not explicitly state no takesy-backsies, the conniving little devil immediately reneged on the agreement and slaughtered the Mughal army, with Humayun barely escaping across the Ganges. The retreating emperor pleaded with his three brothers for support, but they were too busy negotiating with Sher Shah over what land they would receive after their brother's demise. I told you they were shitheads. Unfortunately, Humayun did lose his empire in 1540 and was exiled to Persia for 15 years. But while in Persia, he was able to use some charisma to persuade the Safavid emperor to provide some military support so he could go back and kick the Shah's shit in, which is what happened. The Mughal Empire was restored in 1555 and all was right again. That is, until about a year later in 1556, where Humayun met a rather silly demise. When leaving his library with a handful of books, the emperor had to walk down a bunch of stone steps. Since OSHA training wasn't yet mandatory or invented, Humayun was unaware of the dangerous predicament he had put himself in. After hearing the call for daily prayer, his own muscle memory took over and he knelt down to acknowledge that call as he did on a regular basis. But this time, he tripped, slipped, and tumbled down the entire stone stairwell, bashing his melon open on a stone corner. The poor guy died 3 days later of his injuries, but at least the Mughal Empire reigned for another 300 years, so that's a positive.
Could've won this one, mate.
History facts.
I wasn't thinking for the
This is probably one of the first things we all learned about in school when discussing ancient Egypt. Tens of thousands of slaves enduring endless hours of intense, forced physical labor while barely being fed or provided with adequate water. Drop a sack of sand, chisel something at the wrong angle, devout masochist, you're getting a whipping. Well, it's all poppycock. While there were slaves, they were mainly prisoners of war or household servants who tended to their landlords, but they weren't really part of the main labor force. Instead, laborers in ancient Egypt were conscripted using the corvée duty system, a way to pay off taxes through manual labor. According to the book The Pyramid Builders of Ancient Egypt, which discusses the pyramid builders of ancient Egypt, farmers were usually pulled from their laborious crop dusting for construction work whenever the Nile went all floody during the summer months. While the snobby rich upper class folk avoided manual labor by just paying off their tax burden, them smelly poors were tasked with construction of temples, tombs, and pyramids. Laborers who worked on the pyramids, as well as other large structures way back in the ancient times, were actually well provided for. This makes sense, as having a weakened labor force due to neglect or malnourishment, it doesn't really pay great dividends. Can't exactly move giant rocks when you're completely emaciated. Small villages have been discovered built specifically for housing laborers. These sites also contain various animal bones and plentiful bread jars showing a high-quality diet. But of course, the system wasn't perfect. Thanks to some classic upper-class corruption, sometimes things didn't always go right for these laborers, but they had the power to stand their ground. Dating all the way back to 1170 BC, written evidence has been found of an artisan's strike while constructing a tomb for then-pharaoh Ramesses III. The artisans complained about a lack of promised rations and outright refused to continue their work, dropping their chisels and their hammers to march right up to the ruling class's temples to make their demands. What do we want? Food! When do we want it? Food! After chit-chatting with the local vizier, the workers were able to secure the rations and continued their work. Now don't get me wrong, the labor that these guys endured was backbreaking, extremely strenuous, and downright exhausting, but they weren't outright enslaved or mistreated, as historians previously thought. We've all heard the legends about King Tut's tomb, right? If you disturb an ancient king's burial grounds, you'll be cursed, doomed to die a horrible death. Well, it's not so. You'd probably cough a bit from inhaling millennia-old mummy powder, but that's about it. Now, there has been evidence of some ancient tombs inscribed with curse-like carvings. For example, ancient warlord and Egyptian noble Ankh-Tifi wrote that, quote, "Any ruler who shall do evil or wickedness to his coffin, may the gods not accept any goods he offers, and may his heir never inherit." Similarly, an inscription on the tomb of 10th century BC ruler Kentika Ikeki warns that any impure men who enter this tomb, there will be judgment. An end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird, and I shall cast the fear of myself into him. Now, in a culture that was super superstitious, anyone coming across warnings like that would be like, "Oh shit!
Go kicked
a ghost!"
in the best map as well.
Right out of the room. When King Tut's tomb was discovered in 1922, no such written reprimands or warnings were ever found. In reality, the rumor of King Tut's curse revolves around one George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, a rich English white dude who funded the whole expedition that led to the discovery of the Sandy sarcophagus. He died a whole 4 months after the opening of the tomb, after which a journalist did what journalists do and printed a whole bunch of sensationalized fake news, attributing Lord Carnarvon's death to an inexplicable curse. To no surprise, the media ran with it, making claims of a written curse being uncovered with the tomb, though this never happened. So how did Lord Carnarvon die?
F.
He
Escaped.
done got bit by
No
a
one caught
mosquito.
it.
The resulting bump was accidentally slashed
Not a
while he was
bad
shaving,
day, I
making
guess.
a pretty
It's
nasty
bad.
cut that later got infected. The old chap died of blood poisoning at the age of 56. Dedicated believers have tried to attribute other deaths to the curse, but they're really grasping for straws. Of the 58 people who were present at the opening of the tomb, only 8 had died within a dozen years of the discovery, and by various means ranging from cancer to murder to natural causes. The majority of the men went to live on full, healthy lives. At least they didn't steal any spooky slabs. That might have been a different story.
Sorry, aft.
When you think of Spartans, you probably think about them slippery, shiny hunks of warrior man meat as portrayed on the silver screen. A society of strict and viciously trained bloodthirsty warriors who could decimate any opposing army. But while you're thinking about oiled up, shirtless, muscular men, you might question if this portrayal is historically accurate. It's not. In reality, the Greek city-state of Sparta had no professional army. Although growing up with militaristic training, the purpose was not to create warriors, but perfected, hardened, and respectable citizens who could serve to defend their homeland if need be. That little element of perfection is where some rumors of Spartan eugenics come in. It is believed that ancient Spartans practiced infanticide, the act of killing deformed or undesired babies as a way to strengthen the Spartan society. However, the biggest downfall of this myth is that there's only one historical source that alludes to this barbaric practice, and it's this guy, Roman historian Plutarch. He wrote that Spartan elders would examine newborns for imperfections or weaknesses.
You guys can see it.
Good, good, bad, good. What the?
Hello, Daddy.
Ew. If any were ever found, they would just yeetus the fetus off the Taygetus mountainside. This ensured that only the best of the best would be able to thrive to crushing adulthood. But this bit of literature is almost certainly a bunch of baloney. While historians can't confirm with 100% certainty, they can confirm with 99.9% certainty that this just flat out never happened. Excavations around the proposed baby hucking sites have failed to present any supporting evidence. There have been a few adult remains discovered, but no teeny tiny toddler tibias were ever among them. If you needed more convincing, Plutarch's writings date some 600 years after the height of Spartan civilization. So it might have just been some silly Spartan slander. That would be like if future archaeologists in the year 4000 unearthed fan fiction from today about how medieval Europeans would just shit their britches to ward off witches. Sure, it's questionable, but you could kind of see that happening, right? Despite what you may think, death was not the goal of gladiator battles in the Roman Colosseum.
I already
If
lost
it was,
this game.
Rome
I'm
would
not
have
even
run out of
trying.
them real quick. Now keep in mind that the Colosseum was active for over 400 years, hosting a plethora of different events ranging from gladiator battles to public criminal executions to full-fledged naval battle reenactments with the entire Colosseum being flooded. Pretty wild, right? Well, gladiator battles were basically the equivalent of today's UFC or boxing matches, just with swords and spears instead of fists. These fights were spectacles of sport, and the gladiators were the athletes. You had some super famous gladiators, rookie gladiators, and everything in between. While some gladiators were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war fighting for their chance of freedom, most of the big old brutes fought for fame and fortune, or just the high-octane dopamine rush of being able to legally stab someone in the kidney and getting praised for it. Roman citizens were hyped to watch two dudes duke it out in a sweaty, sandy, sassy struggle of strength. But things were a lot more exciting than just the vanilla missionary position 9-to-5 white picket fence 1.5 children sword and shield type gladiators. Nope. Actually, there were about 30 different types of gladiators ready to clang and bang away at each other. You had your dual-wielding Demochirus, the trident-chucking Retiarius, the silly-looking Caesar, and the alls-out, balls-out Cestus, among other DLC characters.
Wait, I
so
wanna
imagine
fight.
that you're living your boring Roman life, sitting in your boring Roman house, scratching your boring Roman balls when you suddenly catch wind of the gladiator battle of the century. Two andabate pitted against each other. You'd lose your shit. Why would you lose your shit? Because andabate were condemned criminals fighting each other completely blind. Yeah, as a form of punishment, two criminals equipped with nothing more than a sealed helmet and a rusty sword were dumped out into the arena and forced to square off. It's like watching two blindfolded kids trying to whack at a piñata, except they're both potential piñatas. Now, while formal gladiator duels were not to the death, of course some still died, but it was more common to die by bleeding out after the match had been called by the referee. Oh yeah, they had referees. These were often retired gladiators tasked with making sure that the rules of battle were being followed and stopping fights before final blows were dealt. You see, gladiators were expensive investments, so their managers wanted them alive for as long as possible, lest they start all over leveling up another rookie from scratch. So with all that being said, professional gladiator battles were not performed for the sake of death, just for the thrill of the fight, and the potential of death.
How do you reach that? That was so weird.
Ancient myths are tough for modern historians to interpret, as historical writers across time have their own biases. Depending on how they felt about a certain historical figure, they could cement their legacy in history as a smart fella or a fart smella. The prevailing myth that Roman Emperor Nero diddled his fiddle as Rome burned to the ground is one that should go up in smoke. It's commonly believed that Nero, having descended into madness over the course of his reign, started the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, a disastrous and destructive inferno that destroyed nearly 3/4 of the Roman capital. Accusations claim that Nero didn't really like the look of Rome and wanted to rebuild it in his own vision with a lavish and gaudy golden palace, so a conveniently timed fire would have been a great opportunity to do so. The fire is suspected to have started in a shopping district stockpiled with flammable goods. Once the fire started, it was nearly impossible to contain. Rome was a dense city, streets were narrow, housing structures were wooden, and the wind was a-blowin'. This set of conditions provided the perfect environment for the big old fire to really roar. The blaze lasted for 9 whole days, decimating 10 of Rome's 14 districts. But was Emperor Nero to blame? Not at all. According to Tacitus, one of the most influential Roman historians at the time, Nero was not near Rome when the fire started. He was actually several miles away in the coastal town of Antium, but he rushed back home to Rome once he caught wind of the disaster. When he did get back, Nero actually funded relief efforts and opened up private gardens and other structures for shelter to those affected. Despite these efforts, Nero still came under scrutiny from the nobles who hated him, claiming that he should have responded sooner and provided more assistance.
Freaking Nero, dude. I bet my scorched ass cheeks he started that fire himself. Yeah, you're right, he probably did.
Guys, he was literally miles away in another city.
What did you do?
And that's how rumors start. In actual fact, there is no historical evidence that Nero started the fire, and especially no evidence that he played the fiddle when Rome burned. Mostly because the fiddle wouldn't be invented for another 900 years. It's probable that the claim is part of Christian propaganda, as Nero famously blamed them for the fire, leading to their persecution. So who really got the last laugh? It was Nero. He burned a lot of Christians.
I don't want to play. Honest.
It's possible that your middle school history textbooks may have toyed with the idea that ancient Aztecs, or even the greater Mexican people as a whole, saw the invading Spanish conquistadors as godlike figures. More specifically, history has suggested that the Aztec ruler Moctezuma, or Montezuma, however you want to pronounce it, believed that the arrival of the Spanish coincided with the prophesied return of Quetzalcoatl, the Mesoamerican feathered serpent god of creation. But we now know that it's all, as the Spanish say, a bunch of caca. It's certainly true that the native Mexican people were stunned and confused by the appearance of the foreign invaders with their fancy horses, gunpowder, and white skin, but there's no evidence explicitly stating that they were thought of as gods. Letters written by Hernan Cortés himself about his conquests never mention being mistaken for or being interpreted as a god in any way, shape, or form. And this is further supported by the writings of Spanish conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who chronicled Cortez's conquests in real time. One passage highlights a conversation between Cortez and Moctezuma in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Conversation basically had Moctezuma being like, yeah, people around here think I'm a god, that I'm all about gold and silver and precious stones, but look, you see that? Flesh and blood, my dude. We're both the same. I know that you're just a bunch of foreigners and not some otherworldly divine beings. That would just be silly. To which Cortez replied, so where did this idea come from? Well, it actually started to surface decades after the Aztecs were conquered. Publications of Spanish conquests alluded to the idea that Cortez and his men tried to pass their weapons off as magic and their horses off as intelligent, aggressive beasts. So it was mainly a sensationalized retelling of events, portraying the Mexican people as more feeble-minded, all while embellishing the Spanish image.
As it turns out, the Aztec weren't bamboozled by some distrustful deity. The Spanish completely steamrolled the Aztec with the help of guns, alliances to Aztec rivals, and every European explorer's iconic weapon,
disease. It was less, oh my god, and more, oh my god! The Great Depression was truly a financial disaster, not only for the US, but for the entire globe. Most of you out there might recall learning that the stock market crash of 1929 caused the Great Depression, but in reality, it was just the signal that shit had hit the financial fan. Nothing more than a devastating effect from a much more threatening underlying cause. If you're unaware, the world economy is a constant struggle for balance of supply and demand, with price being the end result. Lots of demand and no supply, prices go up. Lots of supply but no buyers, prices go down. Sure, that's a bit oversimplified, but you get the idea. The Great Depression was a catastrophic chain of events stemming from US overproduction of goods. You see, in the early 1920s, the world had entered a time of peace at the end of World War I. This led to an industrial boom. Not for war machines, but for consumer goods. Mass production was going wild, and factories were farting out new products like crazy. To sell these products, companies began aggressive advertising campaigns. The news, radio, magazines, and everything just screamed in your face to buy the latest and greatest doohickey. And the people did. But how could customers afford all of this lavish spending? Yep, the establishment of consumer credit. Cars, appliances, clothes, homes, all purchased on credit. But the United States was not the only beneficiary of a peacetime economy. European and Asian markets began producing their own goods, selling these products to the US for cheaper prices, which caught the eyes of consumers looking to save a few pennies here and there. The big American companies, seeing potential profits leaving their grubby hands, were pissed and lobbied Congress to protect their interests. In order to do so, the Fordney-McCumber Tariff of 1922 was passed. This raised American tariffs across the board, increasing the consumer cost of foreign goods as to thin out the competition and force Americans to buy American products. Europe and Asia promptly responded in kind, and soon a tariff war commenced. All this sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Now, in order to keep a super long story super short, here's what happened next. Demand shrank as American companies and farms overproduced their goods. Too much stuff and no one to buy it means less sales. Less sales means less profit for these companies, and with less company profit, that means they're going to start handing out some pink slips. With lots of people laid off, lots of people have less money to spend, so companies lose even more money, and if they lose enough of it, they go bankrupt. Now, when companies went bankrupt, at least back in the 1920s, the banks that supported them failed. And when the banks failed, people's money straight up vanished, thanks to the lack of FDIC insurance. Everyone loses their shit and rushes to withdraw money from whatever banks are still standing, but there's not enough physical cash to meet that demand. Now, all of a sudden, no one has money. So what happened to it all? The banks lent it out to all the rich people, placing speculative bets on the stock market. Now, when there's a lot of market speculation, stock market prices get unreasonably high. Unreasonably high prices aren't very sexy, so no one else wants to buy them. Instead, they sell to take profits. But when these profits are taken, that stock price drops. When stock prices drop, any remaining shareholders lose potential profit, which is no bueno. So they panic sell whatever shares they have. And when there's enough seller momentum across the board, the entire stock market crashes. So banks have failed, blue-collar workers have lost their life savings overnight, millionaires have lost their fortunes, factories have folded, and farmers have hung up their tools. Not only did this cripple the United States, but the entirety of global trade. The United States could not meet critical export demands, and foreign economies selling raw materials such as sugar, rubber, and lumber lost their biggest customer, and thus most of their money, impacting their economies. The Great Depression was without doubt one of the worst economic disasters of the modern age. The American economy struggled until the United States entered World War II in 1941, where demand for production and labor picked right back up. To put it simply, the 1929 stock market crash did not cause the Great Depression. It was the writing on the
wild
wall that
Paris
the
appears
system was
catch it
breaking.
using
Afterward,
poke
the
catch.
banking
Winners
system
revealed in
was
90s.
overhauled and the stock market heavily regulated to prevent history from repeating itself. And we'll see how that goes. Oh boy, looks like the witch got you again. This time, you gracefully land in Independence, Missouri in the mid-1800s. Everyone's packing up and moving out west to seek their fortune in greener pastures, and you don't want to get left behind. Think you have what it takes to blaze the trail? Let's find out. Since you've just been thrown into this reality, you're only as good as the skills that you can provide. As we all know, there's only 3 kinds of people in this world: bankers, farmers, and carpenters. Nothing else. And thanks to good old democracy, you are now, a crafty carpenter. You enjoy getting hammered and occasionally nailed. You've got some solid survival stats and decent savings. Good choice.
Not that it was yours anyway. Here's your complimentary wife and 2 adorable little cherubs to help you on the trail. Look how cute they are. Your mission is to travel down the soon-to-be famous Oregon Trail. Over 2,000 miserable miles of dirt, disease, and death, formally established in 1836 to help pioneers move out west. But why would I move out west, you might ask? Because you want to. But more importantly, the US government wants you to. Look, the eastern states are getting all congested, industrial, and smoggy. So the United States needs to do some good old expansion. Thanks to the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 and the Oregon Treaty in 1846, there's a lot of fresh open land to settle. Why live in the economic decline of disgusting cities in the east when you could manifest that destiny and fill up those lungs with fresh air on the fertile plains?
That's good air.
If the opportunity of prosperity wasn't enough to convince you, how does free land sound? Thanks to the Oregon Land Donation Claim Act of 1850, pioneers can claim up to 640 acres, 2.6 square kilometers, of land completely free. Time to get supplies. Look, if you're going to be slogging down a few thousand miles of rocky trail, you're going to need to be well supplied if you want to stand any chance of surviving. Pioneers stocked up their supplies in trailhead towns just like Independence, Missouri. Things like food, clothes, tools, livestock, and perhaps the most critical American asset, guns. Because when you're out on a seemingly endless sand ocean, anything's fair game. What's to stop a desperate thief from stealing your precious supplies and/or daughter? Your gun. So be sure that you're well equipped to donate a few lead slugs to their cause. And of course, you could also hunt for food if you need to. When it came to food, a family of 4 would need about 1,000 pounds of the stuff. This was usually beans, rice, flour, sugar, coffee, and dried meats and veggies. Don't forget your pots and pans and your fresh water barrel, or else you'll be washing down your salty deer jerky with a cup of dried rice. For tools, you're gonna need to be making repairs when stuff breaks, and stuff will break. Since you're a carpenter and know how to carpent properly, you're set with a hammer, a saw, and an axe. And of course, you'll need some spare clothes, otherwise you'll be walking around with some breezy cheeks. In order to haul all of your stuff down the trail, you're gonna need a big ol' wagon. This sucker right here is a prairie schooner. Not as beefy as the heavy Conestoga wagons used for shipping freight, but you can still fit so many supplies and family members in this bad boy. With 4 ox power, tricked out wooden wheels, and a non-existent suspension, the kids will be uncomfortably wobbling down a trail at a spine-shattering 15 miles per day. You and your wife, however, will be getting your steps in the entire way. Every day is leg day on the Oregon Trail. So with a modest $800 to your name, you talk to the general store owner and place your order.
Yes, sir. What can I do you for?
Well, about 20 bucks, but I'm kind of looking for some supplies.
Sure thing. Take a look around.
Yeah, can I get, So can I just get one of everything?
Yeah, I'll ring you up.
You better get used to that wagon, because you're about to spend about 6 months in it. You've got almost 2,200 miles of trail ahead of you. But you're not alone. In fact, over 400,000 other pioneers are also making the trek. Just don't make too many friends, because you'll end up burying some of them along the way. About 10% of those who hit the trail ended up really hitting the trail. For better survival stats, many families opted to form traveling caravan groups consisting of dozens of wagons to support each other. But having so many people around inevitably led to disagreement. Hey, can you pass the beans? I don't know, can I? The fuck's your problem? So in order to avoid descending into complete chaos, leaders and officers were elected to direct the caravans, laying out agreed upon ground rules dictating what to do in certain events. So if grandma slips and takes a wheeler 50 to the spine, we all know who gets all of her stuff. Enjoy those dentures. Proper planning gave you those. These concrete rules were designed to prevent arguments down the line. But, of course, humans will be humans.
I just wanted some beans.
But you're a simple fella who makes simple decisions, so you're probably fine, right? What could go wrong? Being on the road for about a month now, you've passed through a few forts and landmarks, and besides a few snakes and your son hucking some stuff off of the wagon for fun, things have been going pretty well. Huh. Well, time to put the carpenter skills to use and make repairs. While there's some downtime, the family has an opportunity to catch up on some chores. Just remember to keep your guard up and avoid any, Since your wagon conveniently broke down next to a freshwater spring, your wife is able to replenish the water supply before washing the farts out of your family's clothes. Meanwhile, your daughter feeds the oxen and your son laps up water from a brown puddle. Look at him go. Oh wait, that's not good. Your son is gonna quickly learn about a little thing called cholera. You see, there were plenty of diseases that plagued the dusty trail, like mumps, measles, and the dreaded dysentery, but cholera was by far the worst. Contracted mainly from contaminated water sources where fellow pioneers expelled their evils, cholera could kill within hours and spread just as fast across an entire caravan. Symptoms included extreme nausea, vomiting out your front, vomiting out your back, dehydration from all the vomiting, leg cramps, restlessness, irregular heartbeat, glassy eyes, and perhaps the worst symptom of all, death. Oh my god, he's dead! No, he could just have cholera. Disease alone was the biggest killer on the trail, with estimates of over 30,000 deaths. So, best to avoid slurping down brown puddles. Sorry, son. Not only were diseases a guaranteed add to the death count, but so were injuries. Even something as simple as a small cut could easily be infected, with the extent of medical treatment being no more than, put some whiskey on it. Your prognosis wasn't too promising. So when little Jimothy falls off the wagon and shatters both tibias, he's now the trail's newest speed bump. If you were afflicted by something, the best you could do was rest. Resting was crucial for pioneers. If they didn't stop to rest frequently, they ended up taking a dirt nap from crippling exhaustion. But not only was physical health a concern, but mental health as well. There were quite a few reports of people throwing themselves off the wagon of life when their mental health deteriorated from not only the monotonous and seemingly unending voyage, but seeing the constant line of rotting bodies of fallen pioneers. It was pretty common to pass several dead travelers every day on the trail, so you gotta think that that's pretty demoralizing, especially if some of those travelers were your friends and family. Even today, some of these graves still mark the end of many pioneers' journeys. Mental health really was no joke. Take for example the famous story of Elizabeth Markham, who was pushed to the brink of insanity while on the trail. In the middle of their trek, she hit a point of exhaustion where she simply refused to travel any further, and nothing could convince her to carry on. After hours of failed encouragement, her husband and children were forced to abandon her and move on. After a while, her son was sent back to get her after she had rested. Bad move. Elizabeth eventually caught back up with the rest of the family, but left her son in the dirt with a rock lodged in his skull. When her husband raced back to find his son still barely alive, Elizabeth set fire to the family's wagon for good measure. Can't continue down the trail if everything you own is reduced to a cinder, can you? Not only were humans a danger to themselves, but so was almost everything else, especially nature. High winds, strong storms, blazing heat, freezing nights, they all did what they do best. They happened. You also had to watch out for wildlife. Wolves, bears, snakes, coyotes, and buffalo. They were all out to get you and your family. But thanks to firearms, humans were able to get them back, especially the buffalo. That's gonna piss off some Native Americans. Speaking of which, there's often a misconception that Native Americans were a constant threat. Not true. In fact, quite the opposite. Native outposts were extremely useful trading sites to replenish food and other supplies. Natives also served as experienced tour guides, escorting some pioneers through rougher terrain like forests and rivers. Granted, there were a few deadly altercations between pioneers and natives, usually a result of pioneers being paranoid and shooting at natives unprovoked. About 800 natives and pioneers were killed thanks to sheer stupidity. Oh well, the wagon's repaired, so time to get back to it. You continued traveling on for a few more months, passing by more forts and giant rocks, but things have been pretty quiet. Wait, why is everything so quiet? They're probably fine. You then break out of your reminiscing when something catches your eye in the distance. There it is! The end of the line and a ticket to a new life. Oregon City. That's in Oregon. All that's left between you and salvation is a huge freaking river. The Columbia River. You can't exactly cross it, so you're gonna need to ford it. You waterproof your wagon, but you still need a raft to hold everything. Oh, but building a sturdy enough raft is just gonna be impossible, is what a non-carpenter would say. It's river time. There's nothing more embarrassing than talking at a family dinner about your favorite historical subjects, only to be corrected by your sibling going, actually, Napoleon was above average height for his time. You contemplate what to do with the rest of your night since you just got absolutely destroyed. You quickly fact check this verbal beatdown, but realize, oh my god, they were right. How could I have been so wrong. If you don't want this to be you, then listen up, because here's some historical facts that you're probably wrong about. Number 1, the majority of American colonists wanted independence from Great Britain. Since we know that history is written by the winners, it is often thought that the overwhelming majority of American colonists hated the filthy stinking redcoats, an attitude that served as the catalyst for the American Revolution. But that's not entirely true. Sure, there were revolutionaries, but in fact, the colonists who wanted revolution were never even in the majority. Less than 45% of American colonists wanted independence, while the other 55% were either rich loyalists who didn't really want to risk losing their comfy fish and chips way of life, or neutral fence sitters who were just along for the ride, throwing caution to the wind and living their simple peasant lives. Once the revolution did start, however, many loyalists either fled to Canada, cowards, or fought against their own people, only to lose horribly. Number 2, the Declaration of Independence was signed on the 4th of July, 1776. American Independence Day on the 4th of July is a time for Americans to let loose by relaxing by the pool, detonating explosives, and having 1 or 10 beers with friends, family, and whatever remaining fingers they have. Surely a day called Independence Day means that the Declaration of Independence was signed on that day, right? Not exactly. Independence from Britain was actually declared on July 2nd, but the head honchos at the time were like, oh, maybe we should write this down and make it official or something. So after 2 days of figuring out Microsoft Word, they came back with an actual declaration, which was officially adopted on the 4th of July. But since everyone was way too busy celebrating in their pools with some brewskis, it wasn't fully signed until August 2nd, 1776. Number 3, George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. Yeah, a lot of these were a little bit more United States themed than I thought, so I'm either biased or the rest of world history is pretty boring. Probably both. One of the first things American youngins are taught in school is how to lock a door and avoid gunfire. And also that George Washington was the first president. But guess what? Not true. Okay, technically he was the first president elected by the people, but there were several other rich white dudes who held the title of president before him. The first being John Hanson, with the title of President of the United States in Congress assembled. Although he only served for just 1 year, he did help structure the growing baby government we all know
Congress.
and know today. Number 4, Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. Yeah, no, the concept of electricity was known, though not well understood, for thousands of years back when Egyptians were getting shocked by electric eels and not learning their lessons. The Greeks discovered the concept of static electricity as well by rubbing fur on amber and attracting a few light objects. Benjamin Franklin was chilling on his porch watching a storm when he pondered, that's probably that electricity stuff everyone keeps talking about. So, he got his handy-dandy, trusty, dusty kite to test his theory. He strapped a small metal key to the string to act as a conductor for the electricity. After the key gave him a small jolt, he was like, nice. So while he didn't discover electricity as a whole, he did prove that lightning was electrical. That's kind of cool too. Not being on the $100 bill cool, but cool. Number 5, people in New York threw themselves out of buildings during the 1929 stock market crash. Good times don't last forever, and the United States learned this very quickly when in 1929, the stock market saw the worst crash in history, dropping over 50% in value thanks to irresponsible consumer and bank behavior like predatory loans and purchasing on credit. Who does that? Billions of dollars were wiped out practically overnight. Now, when your wealth and living standard gets Thanos snapped out of existence, you might think that a quick leap and a hard drill into the pavement would solve your problem since you can't be poor if you're dead. Well, maybe some people did think that, but apparently no one's intrusive thoughts won because there was no reported uptick in self-unaliving in the wake of the stock market crash. It would actually be another 72 years before jumping from buildings became a short-lived fad in New York. Number 6, Germany invaded Russia in the winter during World War II. Finally made it out of the United States. Yeah, there's a common misconception that Germans decided to pull a pro-gamer move and invade their barren, tundra, wasteland ally Russia in the dead of winter, prompting the Germans to be like, fuck! And turn back home. Not the case. Germans pushed into Russian territory on June 22, 1941, and actually made considerable progress on their way to Moscow, since Russia was not expecting such a top 10 anime betrayal. But tough territory challenges, low morale, and overall exhaustion caused German progress to slow down while new, fresh Russian troops were being spawned in. Once winter set in, things only got worse. Since Russia was hosting, Germans were susceptible to extreme lag and their ping was trash. Germans eventually were driven out of Russia after failing to defeat the Red Army. Number 7, life expectancy in the Middle Ages was only in the 30s. This is a mathematical misconception here. You love math, right? Right. So the way an average lifespan is calculated is you take the ages across all people and divide by the number of people to get your average. Thing is, babies weren't really resilient. So when you start chucking a bunch of zeros and ones into the data pool, you get a strongly skewed average. In reality, it was common for people in the Middle Ages to live into their 50s and 60s.
I'm 37. What? I'm 37, I'm not old.
Leaving plenty of time for them to do fun things like farming and... So, if you made it to 25 in the Middle Ages, you were expected to live another 25 years on average. Sure, it's shorter than today's expected lifespan of 73 years, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. Number 8. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Although he is credited with inventions like the phonograph and absolutely terrifying talking nightmare dolls, you probably know Thomas Edison is most famous for inventing the light bulb.
No.
Well, that's a lie. Before Edison's design in 1879, electric lighting was used as far back as 1802 with the electric arc lamp. Operating under the same general principle as a light bulb today, the arc lamp generated an electric arc that would light up whatever room it was in. Problem was, these things were loud, expensive, inefficient, and funny enough, way too bright. The design went through multiple improvements in the following decades, making them much more practical for uses like street lamps or lighting large buildings. To his credit, Edison did improve the design further to allow light bulbs to last longer and be more practical in a household setting, but his light bulbs were not the first. Number 9. Cars were invented in the United States by Henry Ford. Well, look at Americans trying to take credit for things yet again. While Henry Ford never invented the automobile, he did revolutionize the mass production of them with the invention of the assembly line. Oh wait, he didn't invent that either. Ransom Olds of the Oldsmobile brand did. But Henry did take that model and improve upon it by making it a moving assembly line, dropping the assembly time of a single car from 12 hours to just 1.5. Oh yeah, and the first gas-powered automobile was invented by Carl Benz, one half of the famous Mercedes-Benz brand, back in 1886, 17 years before Ford's first car was produced. Also, it looks stupid. Number 10. You should subscribe to the channel. Oh wait, this one's true. How'd that get in there? Number 10-2. The Greeks tricked the Trojans with a giant wooden horse. Well, this one's a classic. We've all heard the story of the Trojan horse, proved that people used to pull off good pranks before cameras and ad revenue. The story goes that during the Trojan War in 1183 BC, sneaky Greekies wanted to gain the upper hand in sieging the city of Troy.
That big.
In order to do so, they built a large wooden horse and left it at the city gate. The Trojans were like, huh, neat, a present. Don't mind if I do, ha ha ha, and wheeled it inside of the city. In the middle of the night, when the Trojans were honk-shoeing, Greek soldiers snuck out of the hollow wooden horse and slaughtered the Trojans, leading to the fall of Troy. Yeah, never happened. In fact, it's debated if the Trojan War itself even happened. The story about the Trojan War was written by the Greek poet Homer, who, funny enough, might not have even existed himself. Historians really need to get their act together because it's getting kinda hard to fact-check all of this. Well, there you go. Be sure to bring up whatever you learned today to your next family or friend gathering so they could be like, that's neat.
What?
Leading to a dead-end conversation where you just go back to scrolling through your phone.
Well, now you've done it. You fell down a weird witch's wormhole and landed yourself in ancient Egypt. So, can you survive? Let's find out. The first thing you might ask is, which ancient Egypt? Because the entirety of ancient Egypt spanned across several thousands of years with quite a few different eras. Let's go with, the iconic New Kingdom, the height of Egyptian power and influence, and the most documented for research purposes. How convenient. Since you made it to this video, I'm going to assume that you're not a literal mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging, fragile infant. So you can give yourself a pat on your freshly whipped back, because you've already survived the hardest part, childhood. Being a kid wasn't easy. Since they didn't have any fancy beeping machines to hook moms up to and keep babies alive, infant mortality rates were extremely high. 20 to 50% of babies didn't make it out the womb. If you survived being born, next up was surviving the world. Much harder. With things like disease, hunger, and other environmental factors out to get you, it's not going to be a stroll through Easyville. I mean, some of these kids look so frail you could practically see their blinking health bar. Hang in there, guys. Oh, bummer. Your main duty as a kid is to help out the family that brought you into this world.
We're talking chores, taking care of your siblings, protecting the farm, learning the family business, everything necessary for survival. As far as food, it's whatever Mama and Papa could scrape together, which is mainly bread, milk, fruits, and veggies. Ever have half an onion on dry bread with warm milk? It's actually pretty disgusting, but it's what keeps you growing. Because if you don't eat, well... And hey, if your papa has a high enough fishing level, he could bring home a pretty sweet catfish to tear into. Get that protein. Your mother, assuming she survived slopping you out of her belly, would feed and care for your ungrateful ass. But none of that is applicable since you just got orphaned by the space-time continuum. Before we take a look at what to do next, let's see where you would fit in the grand scheme of society, because everyone has their place. Ancient Egyptian society worked in a hierarchy with rich and powerful guys at the top and everyone else at the not top. So really no change from the modern world. The head honcho around these parts is the pharaoh. He's the divine king and whatever he says, goes. Subscribe. Just under him are his closest bros and advisors. Then we have an educated and skilled middle class, and then a laboring lower class with slaves and servants at the bottom, which were usually foreign prisoners of war. Since there's a 95% chance that you'd stick out like a turd in a punch bowl amongst a well-tanned, weird-talking population, you'd probably be captured and sold into slavery. Tough break, outsider. But let's assume you can convince the xenophobic guards that you're one cool dude. Hey, I'm one cool dude. It worked. Time to get a job. Since you can't speak Wingdings 3, you're gonna have to prove your worth through manual labor. Luckily, there's plenty of job to choose from like farming and... Over 90% of all ancient Egyptians were farmers, so there's plenty of friends and rivals to be made. You know, see who could grow the best onions or whatever it is farmers did for fun, finger each other's cabbages, I don't know. But your absolute best friend is the Nile River, which is your #1 source of delicious brown water for your crops. Just don't taste test it. Thankfully, the application process to work on a farm is no more than moving a rock from here to there. And with your stellar gamer build, you can easily get the job done. Just remember to lift entirely with your back. As a bonus, you can read and write, not in hieroglyphics, but in cooler things like letters and numbers, perfect for taking your own notes. You're hired. Now you can get to work and earn that bread. But since the Persians haven't invaded yet and introduced proper currency, you'll be working for literal bread. So you slave away for months on Bahir's family wheat farm, eating your brown bread and sandy beer dinners while sleeping on a filthy, crusty, dusty dirt floor. Watch out for snakes, they bite. Day in and day out, you swing your sickles and your hoes, dreaming about the hoes you left behind, taking extra caution not to get too distracted. Looks like you cut off Bahir's arm. Bahir will remember that. It's then you look down and notice some squishing between your toesies. The ground's getting rather moist. The Nile's flooding, you say to no one. After you finish fighting off the invading river rats using your +7 strength copper sword, it's time to pause the farming grind and try your hand at construction while the Nile does its thing. Oh look, the pharaoh wants you to help build a new pyramid. Lucky you. Since you have countless hours placing virtual cobblestone under your belt, this sounds like a pretty sweet gig. Just keep an eye out, because sometimes it's not yourself that you need to watch out for. Daily labor is just part of your worry though, because you still have... Diseases, like slaves, are the hot and trending collectible at the time. You could even trade them to your friends if you're feeling generous enough. I got trachoma. Well, I've got 1st edition smallpox, check it out. With your 21st century wrinkle brain, you know that you need to keep clean to prevent disease, so you take a dip in the Nile to wash your many crevices. Just downstream of the laundry, which is downstream of the town's dumping grounds. Uh-oh, looks like you picked up a friend. A parasitic flatworm went and crawled up your roundworm, and now you have schistosomiasis. With that comes a fever and aggressive diarrhea. And since we're in ancient times, you know what that means. But little wriggling worms aren't the only threats you face. Like the infected fellas a minute back found out, there were many different diseases sickening up the land. The most popular being tuberculosis, smallpox, and malaria. These guys would make sure that your stay in ancient Egypt would be a quick one, so be sure to swat some skeeters and tell your neighbors to cover their coughs for Ra's sake. Oh, sorry, I thought that there was a mosquito on you. Yeah, you too. Anyway, you get back to chiseling some sandstone blocks and, oh, looks like you caught Pharaoh checking out the goods. He admires your strong physique, attention to hygiene, and glistening back sweat. He even heard about your conquering of the river rats, and he's impressed. Those are some good qualities. Good qualities for a soldier. You just got bumped up a few societal ranks. Look at you go. Oh, Pharaoh wants to expand his empire. Well, now your promotion makes sense. Time to go to war. Being a soldier can't be too hard, right? You just pick up a shield and a sword and swing it a little. After all, people are just bigger rats. Oh, sweet, they even have the cool curved swords.
Curved swords?
It's called a khopesh, and boy does it hurt. But if swinging a sword ain't your style, you could opt for something a little less slashy and a little bit more stabby. If you want to poke someone further away but still want to be close enough to revel in their death, I recommend a spear or javelin. If you really have the urge to stab someone at least a few thousand scarabs away, go for the simple and sweet bow and arrow. It never fails. Unless you miss. Alright, time to step onto the sandy battlefield and fight for a country you just fell into. The enemies of the day are the Sea Peoples. No one really knows who they were, and they most likely came from somewhere north of the Mediterranean. But Pharaoh don't give a good gosh dang. They've been flaunting their stupid looking boats and shit for the last time. Fuck you, Egypt! Oh, it's so on. Now, the first thing you're gonna want to do is... Oh, damn. Alright, let's try that again. Respawn. Okay, quick time dodge the arrow, fire your own. Oh, nice shot. Good arc, stable flight, and... Ugh, right on target. Good job murdering that guy with absolutely no complex backstory or family that he was fighting to protect from invaders. To him, you were the bad guy. But hey, war is hell, isn't it? You keep popping off shots and taking out numerous expendable enemy NPCs. While you continue to just riddle the battlefield with arrows, you notice something in your peripheral. Not something, someone. Oh, hey Bahir, didn't know you were a soldier. Oh, thank God. It was just a dream. 15 minutes of useless history. Wait, what? Poland had a bear soldier that served during World War II. His name was Wojtek, and he was a good boy. In 1386, France executed a pig that killed a child. It was arrested, faced trial, and was hanged. Poor thing. During the Great Depression, people would often resort to using potato sacks as clothes. Ancient Mayans worshipped turkeys, as they were seen as vessels for the gods. The 69th and 420th words of the Declaration of Independence are to and districts. The Ford Motor Company was founded in 1903 and hasn't produced a good car since. It's said that in Ohio in 1895, only 2 cars existed across the entire cursed state. And they crashed into each other. Famous scientist Albert Einstein was once offered the presidency of Israel. He turned it down. The British Empire had around 120 colonies at its height in the 20th century. Robert Lincoln, son of US President Abraham Lincoln, was present or nearby during 3 different presidential assassinations. He was just a few blocks away from the Ford Theater when Papa Abraham caught a bullet in the back of his skull. He was an eyewitness to President Garfield's assassination, and also experienced President McKinley getting absolutely cannoned in the chest. Afterward, little Bobby Lincoln refused any future invites to presidential events. William Higginbotham, a physicist who worked on the atomic bomb, invented the first video game in 1958 using an oscilloscope. He called his creation Tennis for Two. It was a precursor to Pong. About 4% of the Normandy beaches are made up of leftover shrapnel from the D-Day invasions of World War II. The first European settlement in present-day Uruguay was formed in 1527. It was called San Lazaro and was, you guessed it, a Spanish settlement. Ancient Roman warships were equipped with huge fucking flamethrowers that were used in naval warfare. They called it Greek fire, and boy was it effective. In the year 1204, Valdemar II of Denmark was recognized as king in Norway. Ketchup used to be sold as medicine in the 1830s. George Washington died on December 14, 1799 at the age of 67. His last words were, "'Tis well." In ancient Greece, skirts were considered manly and pants were for women. Nothing like letting the boys breathe, you know?
The record for the world's longest stare was set in 2011 in Australia. The loving glare lasted 41 minutes straight and
A
0
wild rufflet appears
minutes
catch it
gay.
using poke catch, Winners
French
revealed in
monarch
90s.
King Charles VI suffered from a psychological disorder called the glass delusion, where he was thoroughly convinced that his entire being was made out of glass, and thus likely to shatter into pieces at the slightest poke. He wore clothes enforced with iron rods and prevented anyone from touching him. In 1633, the Shanxi province in Imperial China was ground zero to the Great Plague in the late Ming Dynasty. More than half of the population got sick that year, and over 90% of the province's population was dead 9 years later. The Roman Colosseum used to be covered in marble, but after Rome fell, the marble was looted by big-titty goth pillagers. The Mariana Trench was first discovered in 1875. It is measured at about 36,000 feet or 11,000 meters deep at its lowest point. Dr. John Kellogg, creator of the famous cereal brand, invented cornflakes and graham crackers to prevent his patients from gooning. The ancient African city of Timbuktu was founded in the 5th century. It served as a popular trade route for salt, gold, and people begrudgingly forced to work for free. During the 18th century in England, carrying around a pineapple was a telltale sign that you were rich as hell. Haters gonna hate, bruh. The chainsaw was invented by medical doctors as a tool for symphysiotomy, a procedure for aiding in childbirth. There's an ancient text called the Voynich manuscript, handwritten in an unknown language that has never been deciphered. Wait, what's that
Rufflet
say?
escaped.
Oh,
No one
would
caught it.
Would you look at that? Famous, silly named astronomer Galileo Galilei discovered the planet of Jupiter using a handheld telescope in 1610. So you know how the US government banned alcohol during the Prohibition in the 1920s and 1930s? Well, people still wanted to get absolutely slizzard, so they resorted to stealing and drinking industrial alcohol. You know, like rubbing alcohol used to treat wounds? Yeah, you're not supposed to drink that stuff because industrial alcohol is commonly denatured, meaning that toxic additives like kerosene or acetone are mixed in to prevent people from drinking it. What's fun is that this didn't really stop anyone from power chugging the stuff so they could feel all wavy and wiggly. The mass consumption resulted in the deaths of around 10,000 Americans. Cheers. The most successful pirate in history was a woman. Qing Shi was the commander of the Chinese Red Flag Fleet, which consisted of over 300 warships and about 80,000 crew. Move over, Blackbeard. About 90% of the world's freshwater is frozen in Antarctica's ice shelves. Humanity's been trying to melt it out of there for ages. In 1998, over 1,200 human bones were found in Benjamin Franklin's house. They were used to study human anatomy, or so they say. Pablo Picasso's first painting was called El Picador, which he created at just 8 years old. It sucked. I wrote most of this script on February 29th, 2024. Happy leap year. Pope Gregory IX declared war on cats. Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on the sea. Athletes in the ancient Olympics competed completely naked to show off the guns and show off the buns. The word robot comes from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labor. The year 536 is commonly referred to as the worst year in history to be alive. A volcanic eruption in Europe farted out enough dust and debris to cause a multi-year winter. The lack of sunlight dropped average global temperatures by several degrees, causing crop failure and famine in Europe and Asia. Oh yeah, and then the plague showed up. Napoleon's horse was named Marengo. Established in the year 930, Iceland has the oldest parliament in the world. The 13th Grand Duke of Lithuania was Jogaila Algirdaitis. He was also King of Poland. According to a 2021 census, 55% of Isle of Man residents identify as Christian, 44% aren't religious at all. Abraham Lincoln was a licensed bartender. The first capital of the ancient city of Assyria was Ashur. Now you can get across the Bridge of Death.
What is the capital of Assyria?
Ashur.
Right, off you go.
The very first known written language is Sumerian, with the earliest known usage dating back to 3100 BC in Mesopotamia. The German MG-42 machine gun used in World War II has a firing rate of up to 1,500 rounds per minute with an effective range of up to 2,000 meters. In the Roman Empire, a triumvir monetalis was someone who minted coins. The Great Fire of London in 1666 started in a small bakery and quickly engulfed the majority of the city for 4 days. Firefighting methods at the time were no more than buckets of water or destroying other buildings to stop the spread. In the end, 85% of the city's residents were now homeless. On the bright side, only 6 people reportedly died, so there's a spark of positivity. The Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299 and fell in 1922. At the end of World War II, Russian citizens decided to party hard. So hard, in fact, that the entire country's vodka reserves were tapped out in just 22 hours. Nastrovia. In 1973, Chinese Supreme Communist overlord Mao Zedong offered the United States 10 million Chinese women. As a joke. Instead, he ended up killing 40 to 80 million people during his totalitarian dictatorship. It was supposed to be a great leap forward, Mao. A popular fad in the 1950s was phone booth stuffing, and just like my romantic endeavors, it didn't last long. Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Rich people in 19th century Europe were in harsh competition for who could collect the most unique and rare orchids. Too bad none of them pulled a Black Lotus. Alexander the Great named over 20 cities after himself during his conquering of over 2 million square miles of land by age 30. What have you done with your life? In 1953, US President Dwight Dimmadome Eisenhower was lassoed by cowboy Marty Montana on horseback during his inauguration speech. Nintendo was founded in 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi to produce Hanafuda playing cards. Famed philosopher Socrates didn't really like written words. He believed it was an inefficient way to communicate knowledge and that it would make people lazy and ruin their ability to use the power of memory to recall information. Thus, people would rely on text to retrieve information instead of fully understanding concepts. As a result, the stubborn asshole never wrote anything down. J.R.R. Tolkien's full name was John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. You read the Harry Potter books, right? The Laotian Civil War lasted 16 years, 6 months, 1 week, and 2 days. Despite how old you think it was, the Aztec Empire was actually founded in 1428. King Henry VIII had 4 butt-wiping servants called Grooms of the Stool. For their services, all 4 were formally knighted. At the start of World War I, the US Air Force had only 18 pilots and 12 airplanes. In ancient Asia, death by elephant was a popular execution method. Germany fully controlled 4 colonies during the scramble for Africa in the 1800s and 1900s. They included territories in modern-day Burundi, Cameroon, Namibia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Togo. On average, Germany uncovers about 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs every year. The wealthy class in Victorian England loved making themselves as white as possible, so they would eat and bathe in arsenic to lighten their complexion. The first version of the internet, called ARPANET, began as a connection between 2 computers in California in 1969. It eventually branched out to multiple computers for research purposes and information sharing, forming an intercommunication network, shortened to Internetwork, and shortened more to the internet. Nowadays, you can watch someone press their feet into a webcam halfway across the world for $3.99 an hour. Or so I've heard. China was actually the first country to use paper money all the way back in the 7th century because coins were just too dang heavy for merchants to lug around all the time. Roman gladiator blood was once used as a cure for epilepsy. It didn't work. Using forks to eat food used to be considered offensive to God since he gave you hands to eat with. In the 1856 Belgian general election, Catholics won the Chamber of Representatives 63-45 against the Liberal Party. The Secretary of the Navy during the United States Civil War was Gideon Welles. He had 8 children. The first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece in 1896. The first silver medalist, gold medals didn't exist yet, was American James B. Connolly in the triple jump. Winston Churchill reportedly smoked up to 15 cigars a day. Private George Price of the Canadian Army was the last casualty of World War I. On November 11, 1918, he was hit in the chest by a sniper at 10:58 a.m. in Mons, Belgium, 2 minutes before the war officially ended. Sorry about that. The first emperor of Japan was legendary Emperor Jimmu, a claimed descendant of the sun god Amaterasu, though there is no evidence that he actually existed. Robert Liston was a British surgeon in the 1800s famous for his swift surgeries. In a time where the best anesthetics were a shot of whiskey and a stick to bite on, speed was critical to minimize pain. During his most famous surgery, Liston set a leg amputation 80% record in just 2.5 minutes flat, severing the fingers of his assistant and accidentally stabbing a nearby spectator. All 3 men died. Basketball was invented in 1891 by Canadian-American physician James Naismith. You put ball in basket. Fun. During World War II, Americans called hamburgers Liberty steaks and sauerkraut Liberty cabbage. The weather in Phoenix, Arizona in the US on April 20th, 1969 at around 5 p.m. was 90 degrees Fahrenheit with winds east-southeast at 8 miles per hour. The Lebanese city of Tyre was founded in 2750 BC. The first instance of income tax in the US started in 1861 to raise funds for the Civil War. Anyone making over $800, or the equivalent of $28,000 today, was taxed a flat rate of 3%. Marie Antoinette's music teacher was a German opera composer by the name of Christoph Willibald Gluck.
The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time came out in November of 1998, and I'm still playing it.
No witches were actually burned alive during the Salem witch trials. Instead, they were just hanged, which is quicker and doesn't smell as bad. In 1644, eating pie was banned in England. Meat pies, fruit pies, your wife's pie, all of them. Prince Louis Rwagasore of Burundi is regarded as a national hero. He led a political resistance against Belgium and demanded independence from the colonizers. He was elected second prime minister of Burundi in 1961 and served his country for 2 weeks before he was assassinated by political opponents. Burundi was granted independence from Belgium a year later. The Kingdom of Karagwe in modern-day Tanzania was disestablished in 1963. Adolf Hitler helped design the Volkswagen Beetle. A carrier pigeon named Commando successfully carried out over 90 missions during World War II. He even got a medal. The fifth leader of the Soviet Union was Leonid Brezhnev, and the guy had eyebrows for days. The 27th state added to the US was Florida. Despite humans being around for over 200,000 years, written history is only 6,000 years old, so who knows what they did? Probably hucked rocks at each other. The Industrial Revolution in the US began in 1760
and lasted all the way until 1840.
The popular game Jenga experienced a lull of sales in 2001 because Jenga towers weren't the only ones to fall that year. Silk was first used in clothing back in China in 3630 BC. Silky smooth. During the stock market crash of 1929, the Dow Jones Index, which tracks 30 of the biggest US companies, fell 89% when it bottomed out in the summer of 1932. It took 22 years to get back to pre-crash heights. That's why I invest responsibly. All on red.
Evil kings doing evil things.
Hey, he wasn't a king. Yeah, you're right. While some of the guys on this list weren't kings by title, they held very high positions of power nonetheless. So, to you I say, moving on. Emperor Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, or just Nero to his friends and enemies, was the very last Roman emperor